Happy Monday. It's time for Storytime with Pastor Sarah. My name is Sarah Parker, and I am the Director of Children and Family Ministries at Presbyterian Church of the Way in Shoreview, Minnesota. When I am recording this, it is raining and kind of dreary outside today, but I thought I would share a couple of stories from one of my favorite characters in literature, Curious George. I have a couple of stories this morning. One is called Curious George Goes Camping, and the other one is Curious George and the Pizza. These are written by Margret and H.A. and they are published by Houghton Mifflin Company. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And as always, I like to thank children's book publishers for making it possible for people like myself to share stories with kiddos who are important in our lives and in our sphere of influence. So thank you all for your willingness to let us share these stories. So Curious George Goes Camping. I wonder how many of you like to go camping. We like to go camping in our family. We don't get to do it as often as we'd like, but it's certainly a lot of fun. And now that my kids are getting older, they have definitely expressed a lot of interest in doing more of it. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. This weekend, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. At the campsite, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear while George looked at all the tents. He saw tents for big families and one just the right size for a puppy. There were even tents on wheels. "Would you like to help me put up our tent, George?" the man asked. I'll show you this picture. Now I wonder, can you see the tent that looks like it would be just right for a big family? What about a tent that was small enough for a dog? See it right there. Yeah. There's all kinds of great things in that picture. And you see George? Yeah, checking it all out. George was happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought. But it wasn't easy. "George, why don't you fill up our bucket with water at the pump?" his friend suggested. "We'll need it by our campfire later when we roast marshmallows." There he is, having a little trouble setting up the tent. Marshmallows. George loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them roasted. Have you ever had roasted marshmallows? They're pretty delicious, huh? "Now, don't wander off and get into any trouble," the man warned. But George did not hear him. He was already gone. At the pump, George worked the handle up and down. Soon, his bucket was full. On the way back down the trail, he saw a family packing up. George watched a girl pour her bucket of water on a campfire. The fire sizzled out. George thought that looked like fun. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. "Hey!" yelled a camper. "We weren't finished with that yet." The camper began to chase George. But George didn't mean to cause trouble. Now he only wanted to hide. He ran into the forest as fast as he could, but the camper's footsteps followed close behind. George ran faster and faster. The footsteps came closer and closer until suddenly let's see what happens next. They were passing George. Why, it was not the camper chasing George. It was a deer. What fun to run with a deer! Forgetting all about the camper and the marshmallows, George ran after the deer. But a little monkey cannot run as fast as a deer in the woods. Before long, George was lost and all alone. He felt tired and stopped to rest. At first he was worried. He was very far from camp. See the deer? There he is. He stopped, sat down to rest. There were lots of other animals to keep him company. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel chattering in a tree. Then he saw the tail of a black and white kitty peeking out from under a bush. He was curious. Would the kitty like to play? George gently pulled the kitty out. You see the kitty? Do you think that's really a kitty? But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk, and it was scared. The skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Whew! That spray smelled awful. The animals tried to get away. George wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him. How would he ever get rid of that awful smell, he wondered. Too bad he could not take a bath in the woods. Oof. Yikes. Have you ever smelled skunk spray? Oof. Then George had an idea. He would wash the smell off in the creek. George jumped into the cold water. He splashed and scrubbed, but he was still smelly, and now he was all wet too. But what could he do? George thought and thought. If he climbed up in a tree to dry off, would the smell blow off? No. Even high and dry up in the tree, George did not smell better. Poor George. He wished he hadn't wandered so far from camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, George heard footsteps coming toward him. Someone was coming. There he is, way up in the tree. And from these little squiggle lines, we can tell he still doesn't smell very good. It was the forest animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary, and George saw it now too. It was a fire. George had gotten into trouble for putting out one fire, but this fire wasn't in the campground. You see the animals running, and you see the smoke from the fire? This was an emergency. Quickly, George climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water from the creek. Then, being careful not to spill, he climbed back up and swung from branch to branch through the trees. Lucky that George is a monkey, right? When George got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire with a big hiss. Just then, George's friend rushed out of the forest with a ranger. "George," he called, "I was afraid you would be here." "It's a good thing you were here, George," the ranger said. "We saw smoke from the campground, but you put this fire out just in time." George was glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see that George was safe. But he had a funny look on his face. "George," he said, "what is that smell?" Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of the awful smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, George smelled fine. There he is. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook dinner with them over their own small campfire. fires can be nice if you're careful," said the ranger. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows. The end. Our second story for today is Curious George and the Pizza. "Let's go out for pizza tonight, George," said his friend. At the pizza place, Tony the baker was getting the pizzas ready for baking. He flattened out a ball of dough into a large pancake and tossed it in the air. Have you ever seen someone make a pizza crust like that before? He spread tomato sauce on it, sprinkled it with cheese, and shoved it in the oven. Pizza. Then the telephone rang. "A fellow from the factory wants a large pizza delivered in a hurry," Tony's wife called. "Okay, I'll get my coat," said Tony. George was curious. Could he make a pizza too? He jumped up on the counter and took some dough. George pounded the dough into pancakes. Then he tossed them into the air with all four hands. One of them plopped right in the middle of a table where a woman was sitting. Another landed on a coat rack, and one fell on the jukebox. Do you know what a jukebox is? It's a machine that plays music. And one landed smack on Tony's head. "Who did that?" he shouted. George was scared. He ran out and jumped into a small truck to hide. "That customer is still waiting for his pizza," said Tony's wife. "You better hurry. They'll be closing the factory in a few minutes." "Oh, I forgot all about it," said Tony. Tony looks pretty upset, doesn't he? Quickly, he packed the pizza in the back of the truck and drove off. But George was trapped inside. The truck sped up to the factory, but it was too late. The gates were locked. "Oh, no," Tony groaned. "How will I ever deliver the pizza?" He opened the back door of the truck, and there was George. "So that's where you've been hiding, you little monkey," Tony cried. He reached out to grab George, but then he stopped. "I've got an idea," he said. "You're just the one I need." How good that George was a monkey. He could climb over the gate, get into the factory. "Look at that," shouted the factory guard. "A monkey delivering a pizza." "Thanks, George," said Tony. "You made up for all the trouble you caused. I'm going to make a special pizza for you and your friend when we get back." And that's just what he did. The end. I hope you've enjoyed our Curious George stories today. Poor George always finds a way to get himself into so much mischief, but he also finds a way to be a very helpful monkey before the end of the story. So I hope that you have a great day and a great week this week. And I look forward to visiting with you again soon. Just so you know, in the month of July, we're going to be having some special guest readers for our Monday story times. So be on the lookout for that. They'll be continuing to do story time on Mondays at 4:30 each week. So take care, my friends. Have a great week, and know that even though we can't be together, you are always in my heart. Bye.